Welcome to Tech Talent Unlocked. I'm Anthony Ginn. It's a series of podcasts where we're speaking to thought leaders about a range of topics that are close to our hearts here at my organisation, iQuad. Across the series, we've been talking about skills gap, technology skills, inclusion, culture, social mobility, skills development. And today we're going to be talking about career programs, inclusion, and with a specialist piece on neurodiversity as well. I'm very, very pleased to welcome Lindsey Rowe from SAP on to the podcast. Lindsey, thank you very, very much for joining us. For all our listeners out there, Lindsey is the head of strategic programs and purpose at SAP, and she's very kindly given us some time today to join our podcast, which we're going to have a great focus on neurodiversity. It's something we haven't spoken about on our podcast. So I'm really excited to talk about that further and really dig into that with someone with some wonderful experience. But before we do, I'd just like you to kind of set the scene for our listeners, tell them a little bit about your role. What does that really mean? It sounds a wonderful title. And also just a little bit about yourself before we jump into some of the core questions.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So I guess a little bit about SAP and then I'll talk about the role. So for a lot, obviously this being a tech pod, we'll be aware of SAP as an organisation, but in recent years, and we're actually, this year's our 50-year anniversary, and we've changed a lot as an organisation in that time, and more recently being much more focused and leading in cloud software. So for your listeners, one of the largest cloud software providers, and for those who aren't aware of SAP, a lot of the time that's more to do with the fact that our customer base and where we're focused, and it's a very large customer base, is in those business to business. So a lot of the time SAP technology will be underpinning the things we sort of experience as consumers. So my role, I joined SAP back in 2015 actually, but I've been in software and telco industry for a long time now, so at least 15 years, but probably started my career about 20 years ago. So the role, like you say, it's a really varied one. So we run a number of different strategic programs and look at sustainability. Now, as part of that, when we think of sustainability, we're talking about everything from environmental and climate action, but then very specifically and relevant to today is what is an organisation doing, like SAP, and what our customers are doing when we think about skills, diversity, inclusion, social entrepreneurship, and things like social procurement. So we look across the five areas. Now, in particular, skills and diversity is a large area that we look at on how do we ensure that we have the right talent right now going forward, and how do we attract talent into the SAP ecosystem. So SAP being obviously a really large organisation, but we've got a lot of partners, a lot of customers that use our technology, so it's important that we're thinking about their future as well in terms of talent.
Wonderful. And would you be kind enough to just give us a little bit of an overview of what those career programs are that you have in place at the moment through the organisation?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the stuff we'll touch on looks at kind of the global aspect of how SAP approaches things. But if I think about UK specifically, we've got a large internship program. So we hire between 50 to 60 interns every year. They come on placement with us across all divisions. So I think often as well, when people are thinking of getting into tech, they're thinking, oh, I need to be a coder, or I need to already have all these qualifications in maths and science or whatever it might be. But actually what we look at is more about the person, and actually once they're on placement with us, that's when they get inspired by the diversity of tech. And I don't mean just diversity people, but the roles, what projects you can get involved in. So that's our sort of largest skills program right now. But we're also launching our apprenticeship program. So as you're probably aware, degree apprenticeships and sort of, well, really, level 3, level 4, all the way up have become, which I'm really glad about, right? If I look at other organisations, they've become super popular for organisations to be doing apprenticeships, but also for individuals wanting to start them, and then also parents encouraging it now. That was taking, and it's still going to take some time for people to understand the value of how they can get a degree whilst working, whilst earning. But I think it's so important because it means then everyone's got a chance. So that's the next big launch for us is apprenticeships. We're a massive investor in the levy, so it's like, well, let's make the most of it.
Wonderful. That's great. One of the pieces that we were speaking about, and we were speaking about this prior as well, and you raised it, and I mentioned it at the beginning of this podcast, was your program about that focuses on neurodiversity. And I'd love to just kind of jump into that, and we'll do a bit of a deep dive into that if we may. And then afterwards, I want to then kind of talk about combining all these programs. And talk about some of the benefits that you receive as an organization from obviously the diversity that these programs bring to your organization as well. So first of all, if we can jump into a little bit of the background on your neurodiversity focus of that program, how it might work, and we'll start from the bottom and kind of work our way up if we may.
Yeah, of course, because I think, like you say, I know some of your podcasts previously, there's so much to diversity, isn't there? There's kind of 8 billion of us, right? And we're all similar and we're all different in different ways. But I guess the reason to really talk about neurodiversity or call it out is that I've seen in the last couple of years a real different focus when it comes to neurodiversity. If I think about SAP initially, but also talk about some of the stuff I'm seeing by talking to other organisations. So SAP specifically, we have a global autism at work program, and then each country has their own program as part of that. But what SAP had started to realise was that actually neurodiverse talent, and if we're obviously right now specifically talking about autism, there's skills and traits that are hugely valuable to businesses that really help them with lots of different roles. I think classically people often would have thought that, okay, well, if it's autism, then it's going to be a very maybe process-driven role or a very technical or scientific type role. And of course, there's absolutely people on the autism spectrum where that's the perfect role type, but it's much, much wider than that. So here in the UK, we partner with Ambitious About Autism. So that the importance when you have these types of programs is if you know as a business that you think this is an area that you could tap into talent that might have not been able to get into your organization previously for whatever barriers that they might experience, working with a partner and a charity is super important because they've got the expertise, the networks, they know what's important about assessment, attraction, onboarding, and then ongoing learning and development. So that's been a crucial part of it. But I think it's about talking about neurodiversity. What does it really mean? Because I think a lot, as I say, we're talking about autism as part of it, but there's so much more to neurodiversity. If you start digging into thinking about ADHD, you start thinking about dyslexia, we're seeing a lot of existing colleagues are now opening up and sharing. And that is probably the most inspiring part for individuals. So seeing people that have worked through their career, maybe not realised, or maybe were diagnosed early in life, but just chose not to talk about it in the workplace. So I've seen lots of colleagues opening up. So I think you've kind of got the two aspects that are needed. One is obviously programs to attract and remove barriers, but also looking at your existing talent. Who do you have who might need additional support? So for example, we've been talking with Deloitte recently. Deloitte, there's an individual at Deloitte, and his name's escaping right this moment, which is frustrating, but I'm sure he'll forgive me. But he's just launched Neurodiversity in Business as an organisation to bring employers together, share best practice. Capita is an example as well. We've been talking to them recently. Now what they've done is super interesting because they've created a neurodiversity program, but for placing consultants and employees onto their customer site. So what I love about that is that's really showing commitment. That's not a nice thing to do, and oh, that's altruistic, or it's a CSR type initiative. It's going, no, absolutely, we see a massive amount of skill and talent here, and we also want to put them into our customer base.
Absolutely.
So I think that shift is what needs to happen. It can't be seen as, oh, it's a nice thing to be doing. These individuals are across your business doing roles of lots and lots of variety. They're just your colleagues. Yeah. It's not a separate thing. And I think that's the important thing for all organisations and individuals to know. Yes, that's a characteristic about an individual, but it's not the whole piece. There's so much more to it. So yeah, it's been super interesting seeing it. We've had some great success stories in SAP in particular. We've got an Autism at Work pledge. So people, if you're listening in, check out our website to find out a bit more, because there's some great, there's podcasts, there's content as part of that starts to look at it. But as I say, also talk to your employees. So if I look at, you talked about programs, one of the things we find really successful is our employee network groups. So there's obviously things that a business will put into place in terms of programs, but the ones that are grassroots from employees, from the network groups, they often have the biggest impact because there's so much passion behind them. So if I look at the UK, we've got 5 employee network groups looking at diversity inclusion. That's everything from women into tech. I know that obviously you focus a lot of your podcasts around that, but also they're looking at generational. So how do we make sure that everyone in the organization feels included? Because sometimes obviously when you're running programs, some people might think, well, I don't match those characteristics that you're focusing on. Does that mean that I'm no longer valued? So our generations team looking at that. Then also thinking about things like SAP cultures, SAP pride, and the newly formed one for us is mind and body. So thinking about everything from mental health, neurodiversity, and physical disabilities as well. So we recently started our own journey on becoming a disability confident employer. So it's, you touched on the idea of bringing these topics together, and that's where it, rather than have them as all individual initiatives, start to stitch where the stuff works, because it's not like someone is just one type of diversity. They might actually relate or be an ally for all of them. So you kind of need to connect the dots.
Absolutely, and it's incredible how many programs you guys are doing and the work that you're doing, and it's wonderful to see, and it's also wonderful to hear that you're actually doing it. There's a lot, there's a lot of talk out there and on certain forums, etc. But it's great to see that you guys are putting it through and actually reaping the benefits from it. And one thing I just wanted to go back on was, it was great to see as well, absolutely, probably not so long ago, it was, a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of people with neurodiversity would probably, hide it away, try and brush over it and get on with their lives and career and kind of tuck that under the carpet as such. And it was a really interesting point that you mentioned, obviously, about supporting, existing talent and giving them the confidence to be able to, be more honest ultimately with the employer to receive support. And I'm sure, you'd get better productivity from employees if they're happier. And I just wondered how, a little bit more of an insight, because you've got obviously the existing talent where individuals may then disclose, certain attributes about themselves. But then you've also got your managers as well that may or may not be so confident about looking after certain individuals that disclosed points around neurodiversity, just because they've not been involved in it, or it's not been something that's been on their doorstep immediately, and it's all of a sudden, this is a bit new and kind of scary for me. What sort of support is there within your organization, or what's your kind of thought process around talking some of these managers through and explaining to them that they probably don't have to adapt that much, right?
Yeah, because it's and genuinely people are a little bit fearful, whatever the topic might be. If it's something you're you've not been exposed to in your life or whatever, there is that fear factor, and people don't like not knowing something, and so they just think, oh, well, you know, I just don't want to get involved in that topic. But we've found, I have to say, the managers that have been involved absolutely have just been coming in with such an open mindset and just saying, I don't know about this, teach me, or, you know, and not expecting SAP, but as in just the people around them. So everyone can educate. And most importantly, the best person that educates them is the individual that they hire. Because again, there's bits that you can do, and there's some great resources out there. If you look at the National Autistic Society, they've got some great resources about getting managers prepared and to think about some of those areas, and also the charities and the recruitment partners that people work with. But that's still, you know, there's an element of that will be a generalization. So you know, these might be traits or stereotypes to be aware of. And it definitely helps to kind of have a view of it, because it might help you identify some things. We see a lot of people identify stuff in themselves, or where they've seen their children have been diagnosed. You see a lot of adults then go, oh, actually, this got me thinking. And that's where you see a late in life diagnosis. But the person, as I say, that educates the most is the individual. So being able to go, like, what is it that I need to do to adapt that will make your life easier? Sometimes that could be the work environment. So let's say for somebody that's neurodiverse, it's more sensory linked, what changes can you make? Or is it something where, you know, large environments, social environments, travel environments, to making the, you know, and flexible workings come on loads because of the pandemic, so it definitely helps. But being able to say, what's the thing that you personally, i.e. Anthony, what do you need that's going to make you most productive, you perform at your best? So I think a lot of the time is, don't be scared to ask the questions.
Wonderful.
It's important, and do a bit of research. Like, I always find that, you know, I love researching, so it's not difficult for me, but I find if I'm unsure about something, just start looking at some forums, even following some stuff on LinkedIn, or maybe it's on your other socials or Instagram or whatever. There's just those small pocket bits make such a difference. I know we're talking about neurodiversity today, but at the start of the pandemic, we're part of a network of student employers. So we connect, we talk on WhatsApp, we share ideas. And there's one individual that that I started to follow via Instagram, actually. He was sharing a lot of content, very specifically around all diversity topics, but predominantly around LGBTQ+. And just those bits of content really helped me learn so much. I just didn't know, you know, things around the importance of pronouns, for example. But I wasn't sort of scared about it. It was more a case of, I just don't know if I follow this guy who does know or has more knowledge, and then you start to see the other things that people share. So I always think using different ways. You don't have to go on a really long course, or you don't have to do an exam. It's just being curious about these things will really help managers, but also colleagues. Because if, let's say you hire somebody, or you're working with someone, and there's a characteristic, you're making adaptations, you might think, right, I've nailed this as the manager and this individual. The team need to be on board and understanding as well, because you don't want to isolate the individual in any way either.
Absolutely. And I think being brave enough to ask the questions, I think is a huge step as well. Because I think certainly, you know, I think historically, let's just say, it's been probably a very formal process, the whole review process, employee review process. And, you know, one thing that, as you mentioned, the pandemic's actually helped is us to try and, you know, readdress some work-life balance, which is hopefully, you know, gaining a little bit more human element within employees, within their employers, because typically, like in my house, I'm normally interrupted by one of my many children, and it just kind of gives a little bit more insight to individuals rather than just a pure focus, and just trying to soften the kind of relationship from being so hardline to have the manager as well have that kind of honesty that he might not know how to deal with it, and therefore asking, those questions has got to be that first huge step. So yeah, no, I think you're right. And you mentioned something else which I thought was great, which is there's asking the questions, but you mentioned as well in the manager support, and you were so pleased that they had an open mindset, and that's one of the biggest pieces. You've got to have that open mindset. For me personally, that's what I love to hear. Because I'd like to think that we're moving away from that kind of old school mentality of it's my way or the highway style managerial approach, because otherwise you're leaving so much on the table in terms of your employee contribution that you could get out of them. So I'm very, very, very pleased to hear that. It was a great insight. One of the bits from my long-winded original question was, what sort of impact are you seeing to your organization? I mean, you've mentioned multiple programs here and pieces and partnerships you're involved in. What are sort of some of the benefits that you're seeing across the organization that's being mentioned, or some of the pieces that you really feel has generated a positive impact?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, and I sort of touched on the idea that, these programs, they're about driving impact and performance for an organisation, rather than the altruistic aspect. And actually this year we just released, we worked in combination with Oxford Economics on an impact report, and that report looked at everything that SAP are doing in the UK. Where are our investments happening, what types of programs that we have, what do we do around skills and diversity, what sort of CSR partnerships that we have. Now that impact report, once documented, and you're reading it back, you're going, the impact to our employees and also the wider ecosystem that looked at it was actually just going, I just had no idea that they're the types of things we do and what the impact is. And then thinking about the kind of economic impact of this. Because I think that's a big, as I say, and I keep labouring the point about it's not an altruistic piece. Yeah. It's much more about, this is business value in doing so. Recently, I was just reading a book, and actually, I have got it. One sec.
No problem.
It's not a particular plug for the book. I don't know the individuals, although I do follow them. But I don't know if you can see it. Neurodiversity at work, right? But what I really like, and is just the opening: drive innovation, performance, and productivity with a neurodiverse workforce. So totally changing the tone of what it means to employ neurodiverse individuals. But if I think just about diversity and inclusion overall, it makes such a difference to things like your employee engagement, your leadership trust, the types of things that organisations measure themselves on. It's the programs that then make the difference. But sometimes as well, if we think about impact, and yes, that we've got stats and numbers and all of the other things that organisations will measure. But you think, if one person suddenly felt that they could approach an organisation based on something they heard, then it was well worth all of it, in my opinion. I'll give you a real short example of that. So when we had our Autism at Work programme, we were talking about it, and a colleague saw it and shared it with a friend whose son had been diagnosed with autism. They then got in touch to say, oh, we're really worried about our son, what's it going to mean for him, career prospects, all these sorts of things. He'd love to do work experience, but he doesn't feel comfortable, these types of areas. So we said, but he drives past our office, so this is pre-pandemic, drives past our office every day and just would love to know what goes on in there. So a real curious mind. So we adapted a little bit, of course, knowing that he was a bit concerned. So we said, well, come in and see our offices one evening before you come in and see it busy and all the different things. Yeah. We could ask all the questions and those sorts of things. And we tailored his work experience. We knew he was a massive Spurs fan, tailored, tech, what tech can we do, and link it back to like the analytics or whatever of the team performance. And then he went away. He then came back on a group work experience, and he was one of the more confident individuals compared to others, right? So if I think about impact, of course, it's all the bigger numbers and stuff, but I can't stop thinking about that one lad who just thought, and actually for his parents were paranoid and worried.
It must have been incredible for them.
And actually we said, right, you don't come in, he's all good. You just need to let your fears and worries, let the reins off, We won't, we'll look after him for the day. It'll be awesome. And then he came back with that different. So again, just taking some of the panic away for the parents as well, because you know, a lot of the time, you know, it's the parents that are worried as well.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, the positivity across that is incredible. The positivity for the individual, yeah, for yourselves, for your organisation, and as you said, actually, you know, probably wasn't a huge amount of workaround that you needed to do, and actually ended up being one of the more, you know, confident individuals within the group. So it shows you how much the little pieces all add up. That we're all trying to do. And then, as you say as well, actually, I think there's a thought process that sometimes is escaped around actually the real business positive impact that this diverse workforce generates in terms of bottom line as well, which sometimes gets kind of lost in translation sometimes, which is you know, obviously extremely important as well. Well, that's an amazing story. I really love the fact that it's just such a kind of small touch, but with big impact, right? Especially to that young man's family, that's for sure as well. So it's wonderful to hear. I mean, one piece that, you know, we've spoken about, I've spoken about to a few people on this podcast, and you know, one thing the pandemic's done is obviously, you know, we're working from home. Sometimes it's hybrid, sometimes it's not. We're up and down at the moment, and there is a real complexity to how you can ensure the right cultural message is being delivered throughout organizations. And it's something I like to ask people to see, you know, how you're finding that, to try and keep the level of kind of message being sent across through your management, through, you know, to your employees, especially when I imagine, you know, there's hybrid environments, there's full work from home environments, and it's very difficult to keep that consistent.
It's super hard, and it's kind of lucky you asked the question today, because I've actually got a stat that I didn't know it was relevant when I heard it yet, or how relevant. But we had a meeting yesterday, and what's the name of the organisation? So it's the Whitehall and Industry Group. Yeah. We're doing a presentation to our leadership team about loads of topics, but as part of it, they did a bit of a quiz. You know, we're all used to that now. It's the way you get people engaged on these things. But one of the things was what organisations are most worried about in this hybrid, and it said 45% of them it was about the culture. So I actually got that question wrong. There was like 5 other options, and I thought, yeah, culture is going to be up there, but I didn't realise it was going to be the highest one. I think for us, where it's difficult is the size of SAP as an organisation. Geographically, you know, very, very diverse, but then people that had built cultures in offices who then, so we have multiple offices all over the country, and we've acquired businesses over the years as well, who then come with their culture, and there's an SAP culture. It's how do you blend that? How do you make sure that it's not a case of, right, get yourselves in and fit the SAP culture? How can we learn from those acquired businesses? Because often they are organisations that might have been sort of SME or kind of startup type businesses. So it's a very different culture to coming into a larger corporation. So that's made it very, very difficult. And then each team built up their own little culture and different focuses. And then say, as soon as you can't deliver it over an email, you can do different calls and events and different things, but not everyone's tuned in at that moment, and you need to make sure that your management team are on point. And so, funny enough, again, this conversation we had yesterday was around, we've got a big kind of transformation program. We know the types of areas we really want to focus on, but it's about everyone being on board with that messaging. You know, and we call it often intern to MD or intern to CEO, right? You need to make sure everyone is on board with it. It's not just a case of, oh, well, the leadership team are saying do this, everyone will just do it, because that's not, you know, you need it coming all the way through. So it's just making sure, partly you're joining the dots of your programs, bringing it always back to the cultural strategy aspects, but also, you know, listening and ensuring you're actually hearing the voice of the different communities within the business, because there's so many of them and people connect in different ways. So like I say, if you've got an employee network group, they'll then start building their own views and cultures, and you know, it's super complex.
Trying to keep those kind of localized cultural views and that holistic company view, and merging the two is whilst also working remotely is quite a task at hand, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. I suppose the final piece that I just want to ask you is a really simple one, which is what's you know, what are you looking to try and achieve for 2022? What would be some great results for you as the head of strategic programs and purpose at SAP?
Yeah, good question. I'll once I've answered it, I might copy it and just put it into my goals for the year, right? But I think for me, it's a continuation of some of the programs. So I think it's really important you don't start loads and loads of, you know, initiatives, let things bed in, start to see the impact of them. So I want to see some of those really, you know, go from, you know, great to even better or whatever.
Programs.
But I think for me, it's probably around the skills and apprenticeship piece that's going to be, you know, a key focus, along with sustainability. But obviously, if thinking of the relevance to our podcast today, it's that skills piece. You know, when I see the first, you know, apprentices walking through our doors, whether that be physical or virtual, that, you know, I'll definitely be doing a bit of a dance, because it's something I've talked about, probably to the point that people just don't want to hear it anymore. But it is so important. It does take time to put all the processes and get it right and all those sorts of things. But we've been investing in the levy. It's time to see them come through the business, especially individuals that wouldn't have ever thought they could have a chance of a career at SAP. I mean, I personally didn't go to university, and I think, oh, well, that was fine back then. It's hard. People find it harder now. Absolutely. I would hate the idea that I couldn't have had these opportunities because of an education background or not going to uni. So that's the thing I'm, I guess, most looking forward to this year.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much. And like that, 30 minutes has flown by. So, Lindsey, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a wonderful insight into your role, your organisation, the multiple programs that you're running. And, you know, I really hope that it's given our listeners and young people some advice and some thought process around programs that they may not have even known existed, as potential opportunities for them for now and in the future. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And certainly, listeners, our next podcast will be released in about 3 weeks' time. I hope you can tune in for that. Thank you very much.